Hi parents, my name is Rosalind Prather and I am one of TC's co-founders. Trusting Connections is a full-service nanny agency that began in Tucson, Arizona, and we've since expanded to the Dallas-Fort Worth market and recently opened our newest location in Phoenix. One of the things that makes Trusting Connections so unique is we are a classic nanny referral agency in the sense that when families are looking for a full-time or long-term nanny, we are like matchmakers. And so we connect families and nannies based on compatibility using personality assessments and just a really great in-depth process. But we are also a sitter service for families that maybe don't need a full-time nanny, but just need someone part-time or occasionally or as a backup option. So we do it all. And one of the things that's really important to us as an agency is to be a resource for families. As local industry experts, we really feel that it's our job to talk to families about some of the safety concerns surrounding hiring a nanny or a babysitter. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. We recognize that not every family is going to use an agency, and that when families do choose to find a sitter or a nanny on their own, we wanted to impart some of our wisdom with you so that you can keep your family safe. So welcome to Sitter Safety, what every parent should know, and we will just go ahead and get started here. So again, this is a very important topic because parents really don't know what they don't know when it comes to hiring childcare providers in your home. And so this is going to walk you through some of the most important things that you need to consider before hiring a nanny or sitter if you choose to do that on your own without the resources and expertise of an agency. So let's first just kind of talk about our current climate and what is going on for families. So we have a lot of online nanny finder sites and apps that give you the illusion that it's easy to find nannies and sitters because we have so many choices out there. But really, more choices just make it more difficult for parents to find someone because families are left with sorting through thousands and thousands of candidates in order to find someone that is quality, that is safe. And we know this because this is all we do for a living every day. And we are everywhere where the nannies might be. So as an agency, we actually pay to be on platforms like some of the most common online nanny finder sites. So we're everywhere where they might be. So chances are, if there's a good candidate in your city, we probably know about them and have been in communication about them, in communication with them. But what we found is that very, very few of those nannies online are even a good fit for our agency. And it's a really long process to get there and identify those people. So when you start with an online nanny finder site, the first thing you have to do is run multiple searches in your zip code. You have to filter out for, does this person have experience with toddlers? Is this person allergic to cats? Is this person in close proximity to me? Various different filters that you have to sort through and run searches. Then you have to go through candidate after candidate after candidate, reviewing their profile, looking at what their qualifications are, making sure that their work hours and their availability matches what you're looking for, even doing a little investigating. So when you see someone that looks like it might be a good fit for you, maybe Googling them to see what you can find, reading reviews on them if the online nanny finder site you're using allows for that. Maybe you're doing other online presence checks besides a Google search. You're looking at Facebook profiles or Instagram profiles. And so there's a lot that you're doing behind the scenes there. Then you're having to email each one that you're interested in. A lot of the time, these candidates are not going to get back to you. If they do, there's going to be a lot of back and forth because you then have to kind of determine, is this person really a good fit? Does she know what we're looking for? And so there's a lot of that involved. Then when you finally get to the process of you're ready to interview them, you have to coordinate a time and a date and a place, and then at any step along the way, they could go MIA or find another position. Even after you've, finished through the whole interview process and decided that they're going to start and you've offered them a position, the risk always exists for them to call you and say, hey, I found something else. This is no longer a good fit for me. And so we hear time and time again about families that have finally come to our agency because they're so frustrated, they're so tired. It is time consuming and it can be really stressful. So that is one thing to keep in mind. If you're going to go into it, we're not saying that families can't find really awesome nannies and sitters on their own. We're not saying that you have to go through an agency in order to keep your family safe. However, it is important to note that going through an agency is a preferred choice for convenience, for time, for safety, all of those things. And that brings us to the second point, is that even though we have lots of choices, there definitely is a false sense of security that exists among many sites and apps. A lot of them advertise that their candidates have, they've been background checked. But what parents don't understand is that there's a difference between a standard computerized background check and what we would, recommend, which is a more extensive background investigation. And we'll get into the differences between those. But I think that, again, parents don't know what they don't know. And there really is a false sense of security that exists for families that are going online, they're using the apps because they just assume that the website or the company behind the Sitter Finder app has fully vetted candidates. And what we found is that really is not the case. So we do want to definitely make the distinction that nanny finder apps and sites are not agencies, and there is a big difference. And we know that families sometimes feel like these two things are synonymous with one another, because we'll have families say, we'll say, have you worked with an agency before? And they'll say, oh yes, we've used such and such.com. So they feel like it's an agency, but there's some really, really big differences here. The first is that you are really, anyone who's anyone can create an online profile. Sorry, we're going to go back here. So anyone who's anyone can create an online profile. Whereas with an agency, you're only going to be meeting candidates that have actually met with a human being, and there's more of a filter there. The second thing is that once a profile has been created, it's not always the case that anyone has actually met this person in person. Whereas with us, we're doing in-person interviews and we are meeting each and every person who a family might potentially meet for an agency. There's not nearly as extensive of a process in terms of screening and vetting. The site just might do a simple background check and that's it. Whereas an agency is going to do a lot more in the way of that we're going to get into, that you can do on your own, like references or drug testing. And then finally, because they are not employing this person, there isn't an ongoing relationship and rapport built. Most of, if not all of our employees and our nannies and sitters are people that we interact with on a weekly, monthly, daily basis. We're talking to them on the phone. We're interacting with them in the office. They're working with our clients on a regular basis. So that trust is being built, and we know that they are providing a quality service. And that's something that's missing on an online site. And you need to understand, when you're looking for people on your own, that just because they're being represented by this online site or through the app does not mean that someone has actually done all the steps that we're going to recommend that you do. That's why it's so important that you, as the family, take it into your hands to give a candidate a proper screening. So let's actually get into what that looks like. So, a lot of times when we're making a really important decision, we say that you just need to sleep on it. But we all know that parents don't sleep, so I thought that that was kind of a silly way to put it. So I'm going to instead ask you to just sit. SIT. And the S stands for screen, the I stands for investigate, and the T stands for taxes and laws. So before you're bringing someone in your home, before you're offering anyone a position, whether you found them online or even if you have been introduced to this candidate through a trusted family member or friend, every single person should be going through the exact same process. I talked a lot about finding people on online sites or through apps, but a lot of families actually find people that have been referred by a trusted friend. And so there's even an added layer of comfortability because you trust your friend, and there's still more assuming that's happening because you've assumed, well, your friend likes her, she must be amazing, but you're assuming your friend has done a proper screening. What happens is that some people are referred from family to family to family, and no one has actually done a proper screening on this individual, and they are using drugs or they have a criminal record. And so just because someone has been referred by somebody you trust doesn't mean you don't need to do these things. So for every candidate, regardless of where you found them, you need to screen them, they need to be investigated, and you need to consider taxes and laws. And so we're going to cover each of these in more detail. So when screening a candidate, the first thing you need to make sure of is that they are legally able to work in the US. It's something that, does happen. Families do hire people who are not legally able to work in the US. And obviously, you do just run the risk of being reported, of being caught, and the legal repercussions of that. You are legally required as a family to fill out an I-9 when you hire a nanny or when you hire a sitter. And on the I-9, on the I-9 form, it'll give you more information about the types of documentation you need to be looking at to verify work eligibility, such as a driver's license and a social security card, for example. And there are other combinations of documentation that would prove work eligibility. You can find the I-9 form on uscis.gov. And so I encourage you to go look at that. But if you do hire a nanny or sitter, filling out an I-9 is one of your legal requirements as a family. The second thing you're going to want to do is verify their experience. Look over their resume. Look at any gaps in their resume. Okay, I see that you worked for this family from 2013 to 2016, and then you worked from this family to 2018 to now. What happened in that in between? And really figuring out that, filling in those gaps. Asking for the names of the employers and a phone number so you can actually call and say, did this person work from you from this date to this date? And just making sure everything is checking out. It's always a red flag when even the smallest things aren't checking out. Remember, if people can lie about the small things, they can lie about the big things. So if they said they worked for a family for 3 years when it was only 1 year, you should definitely consider that a red flag. The other thing that you're going to want to do in screening them is making sure that they have the skill set that it would be required for your position or any educational requirements that you have. It might not matter to you if they have a high school diploma, for example, but if it does, it's not unreasonable to ask for that documentation from them, and they should be more than willing to provide that. If you have special skill set that you need, maybe you need somebody with special needs experience, don't assume that they have that. This is when you should be asking for references related to that experience so that you can verify those things. Again, you're just going through the list and you're checking, making sure this person checks all the boxes. And with each box that's not checked, this might be someone that you might need to be weeding out. Another thing families don't necessarily always think about is if you want to require any vaccination. So especially for families with young children, with infants, are you going to want to require a Tdap or pertussis vaccine? Your pediatrician is going to require that anyone, even in your family that has close contact with the baby, should be vaccinated. So why should it be any different for your nanny? You are legally required or you are legally allowed to require that. Some families do reimburse the nanny as a courtesy. Other families will just say, this is something I expect you to take care of on your own. Regardless of how you do that, just set the expectation from the beginning. Flu shot is another one, or just general vaccinations. Not all people are vaccinated, and if that's something that's important to you, that's something you need to think about when you're screening and going through candidates. Does this person have reliable transportation? Are they going to be able to get to work on time? If they don't have a vehicle, are you going to be okay with them using Uber or other public transportation means to get to your job? Or is it important to you that they have a vehicle so they can drive children, or they can have a way to get to the hospital in the case of an emergency? And then obviously, if they have a vehicle, is it registered? Do they have proper car insurance? And those are also documents that you can certainly ask for. Another thing that you might want to consider in weeding out candidates is if they have CPR and first aid training. We recommend that they should have it for adults and infants, and that it should be up to date and current. They can provide you with a CPR and first aid certification card, and then if it's going to be, expiring, having that conversation about, are you willing to keep this up to date? If they don't have it at the time of hire, it's something that you can work into your agreement. As long as you get this training before the start date of the position, we would accept that. Also, just a general online presence check, just generally looking into any digital footprint that's been created and anything that you can learn about them online. Finally, the communication piece and just any initial impressions you have do matter. Are they prompt in responding to your emails? Do they have a professional demeanor? Do they do what they say they're going to do? When they say, I'm going to call you tomorrow at 5 to discuss, and 5:30 rolls around and they haven't, that means something. Does just everything in general add up about them? So as you're considering a candidate, these are all the screening pieces that you need to be thinking about in order to weed out people that might not be a good fit for your family. So now we move on to the I portion. Now that you've screened and you've gone through, making sure they meet some of the minimum requirements for the position and screening out those who don't. Now you need to really investigate and look into this candidate beyond initial screenings. So one of the things that parents first think about is this as a background check. And what we want you to know is that a background investigation and a background check are not the same thing. And a standard computerized background check where you're plugging somebody's social security number into a computer and spitting out results is not going to yield the same feedback as a licensed private detective investigating someone by hand. Because you're assuming that A, the social security number that they gave you is in fact theirs, but also B, you're limited in terms of the type of reporting that you can get. There are multiple counties that a person could live in, cities, states, and there isn't currently a requirement for counties to report any criminal activity to some central database. And so usually most standard background checks are going to give you just a really surfacey view of a candidate, and unless it's some major federal crime, it might not show up. A licensed private detective is going to look into, or should look into, counties and cities that the candidate has lived in the past 7 to 10 years, to really get a better picture of any type of criminal activity. Unfortunately, most online background checks are really insufficient, which is why we as an agency have actually partnered with a local private detective that investigates all of our nannies by hand. So that is something that you do need to be aware of. The second is you need to do an in-person interview before offering the position. What you will find is that sometimes the very best nannies don't necessarily interview really super well, and some of the nannies who really wow you in an interview don't end up working out in actuality. And so beyond an in-person interview should be a working interview where you really get to see this person in action. You do need to pay them for their time if they're going to be caring for your child, for the day, but you are kind of hanging out in the background and observing. And so a working interview is something that I would recommend if someone's passed an in-person interview. When you do an in-person interview, you really want to make sure you're asking open-ended questions. So asking someone, do you like to read, is kind of leading the witness. Obviously, they're going to say, oh, yes, I love to read to children, as opposed to saying, tell me about your favorite children's book and why you love it so much is going to yield a lot better result and response, and you're going to get to glean a lot more about who this person is as a candidate. So questions that elicit a yes or no answer aren't as effective as these open-ended questions that force the candidate to really elaborate. And so definitely an in-person interview is a must, followed up by a working interview. Next is a motor vehicle check, and if you are working with a private detective, this might be something that's part of that, but especially if you're having this person drive children around, you'll want to know what their motor vehicle record is like, and really you get to decide as a family what you're okay with. If someone's had multiple speeding tickets, are you okay with that? What about an MIP? What about a DUI? You know, you kind of need to determine what you're comfortable with. And then also drug testing. So unfortunately, we are one of the only agencies in the country that drug tests. There are some, it's just not very common. And we consider this to be an incredibly important aspect of investigating a candidate. We know that candidates can, for example, if you're doing urine testing, can buy urine, but so it's not a foolproof test. However, it is certainly a deterrent. Knowing in advance that you're going to be drug testing or you're going to be subjecting your nanny to random drug tests is a deterrent in and of itself for someone who is a drug user. It's really not uncommon for candidates to kind of go missing when they realize that they're going to go through this scrutiny. And this actually brings up another point, and that is, interestingly, when we are using these online sites as an agency to recruit candidates to work for us, sometimes they fall off the face of the earth when they realize we're an agency. And why is this? And it's because some people like flying under the radar, and as soon as they know that they're going to be put through this kind of scrutiny, and they'll be gone, and you know why. So drug testing, again, even if it's not foolproof, is a great deterrent. I would always check with the laws of your state in terms of how you make sure that you are drug testing your candidates legally. More likely than not, you should have them sign some kind of consent form that allows you to do this. So I would just look into the laws of your state, but there are different options as well. You can do urine testing, you can have hair follicle testing, blood testing, saliva testing, and all of these have different pros and cons. You know, a hair follicle will give you results on any past drug use within the last 90 days, whereas something like saliva is only going to tell you about something that happened in the last 48 hours. But again, there is pluses and minuses to each of these. And finally, part of investigating a candidate is talking to families who this person has worked for in the past. And the same goes for reference calls as it does for interview, asking open-ended questions to get as much information as you can. Tell me about a time when the candidate was late, and how did he or she handle that? Tell me about a time when the candidate exhibited or took initiative to do something, for example, and having really lengthy conversations with former employers. If someone does not have a whole lot of nanny or sitter experience, and that's something that's not important to you, even talking to other supervisors that can give you some insight into what their work ethic is and just their general character can be helpful. So the last portion of this, and one that families don't necessarily think about as much as they should, because some just don't know, is this issue with taxes and laws. So I will just throw it out there right from the start and let you know that it is absolutely illegal to pay your nanny cash under the table. A lot of families do this, right? For decades, we've grown accustomed to this. You know, you have your babysitter and you're paying her cash here, cash there, and everybody does it, right? Well, the reality is not everybody does it. The IRS is really cracking down on our industry. During the last recession, you had all of these professional nannies who were filing for unemployment, and the IRS, the government's like, wait a minute, no one was ever paying into your, paying employers taxes. And so the IRS is definitely cracking down on this industry. Every year the threshold changes. For 2020, if you have paid a nanny or babysitter $2,200 within that year, you are absolutely obligated to pay your employer's share of Social Security and Medicare and other employer-related taxes. Your nanny should be getting a W-2 at the end of the year. In general, nannies should never be getting a 1099 in general, but they are for sure never independent contractors. A nanny and a babysitter, by its very nature, is always an employee, never an independent contractor. Sometimes when families are using online nanny finder sites or apps, and the app has connected you to a sitter, it's easy to assume that the agency or the company behind the app is taking care of this person's taxes, but that's more than likely not the case, especially if you're paying the nanny directly. You are more likely than not considered to be the employer. So I would always encourage you to check with an agency that you're working with or an online site or an app and make sure, are you giving this person a W-2, or is that something I need to be doing? Again, this is something that is really, the IRS really has their eyes on. Nannies can report families by filling out a form and saying, I was improperly classified as an independent contractor, and you could potentially be in big trouble for it. So nannies are never independent contractors. They are always household employees, and they are owed a W-2. Additionally, a nanny is always considered to be non-exempt, which means they're hourly. There are some families who will pay what they call a salary because it makes it easier to not have to say, okay, well, this week you worked 25 hours instead of 26.25 hours or whatever. So they'll say, we're going to give you this amount each week regardless. That's okay, as long as it comes out to more than minimum wage and you're factoring in overtime, which we'll get to in a minute, but they are not considered salaried employees. Nannies are always non-exempt, which means they're hourly workers that are entitled to overtime pay, time and a half for hours worked over 40 hours in a 7-day period. This means that paying a nanny or babysitter a flat rate for the day and saying, well, I'm just going to give you, I'm going to be gone for 10 hours for work and I'm going to give you a flat rate of $50. If you divide that out and it's less than your state or federal minimum wage, if you don't have a state minimum wage, then you are in violation of the law. So nannies are entitled to minimum wage. In some states like Arizona, where employees are entitled to paid sick leave, that is true even for household employers as well. So you're going to want to be familiar with the laws of your state to make sure you are in compliance with household employment. They deserve and they are entitled to all of the rights and protections that other employees have. So it's just something that, I encourage you to talk to your CPA about, talk to an attorney about. We also recommend companies like Homework Solutions is the company that we recommend to families, and you can call them and just get some information. They are companies that will pay the nanny for you. So they deal with all the taxes and all of that, but they are also a great resource just for families seeking additional information. The other thing to think about, and it potentially could have, again, it's another one of these issues that matters for what state you're in and the different laws associated with that, but surveillance. Legally, you are able to have surveillance on your nanny while she's in your home. And so it's something that we recommend because it's good to have, just to have those eyes on someone, or just popping in without notice. Even after you've screened a person and investigated them and set everything up properly regarding taxes, it should be, you never should just automatically assume that everything's fine and become comfortable. You should be having ongoing sit downs with them, popping in unannounced, like I mentioned previously, and just always keeping your eyes and ears open just to make sure that everything looks okay. Follow your gut. a lot of times families will just say, you know, there's just something off, or I'm just feeling uncomfortable. Those are not feelings that you want to ignore. Parents have great intuition about people, and it's just not worth it to have someone like that with your kids. And unfortunately, more often than not, those gut feelings are accurate. So that is all. Those are our biggest tips on hiring someone if you choose to hire someone on your own without an agency. But I do want you to know that we do offer our screening services a la carte. So for families that don't want to go through our agency in order to hire a nanny, but still want the safety and security that an agency can provide, our background investigations, our drug testing, we have a number of screening tools that are available for you to purchase a la carte. And so we encourage you to check us out online, trustingconnections.com, and under the services tab of our website, you'll have more information on DIY screening and consulting. And as always, we just want to be a resource for families. Whether you choose to use us or not, we want to keep you and your kids safe. And so you can always email us, info@trustingconnections.com, after you watch this webinar if you have any other follow-up questions, and we would be more than happy to answer those for you. We wish you the best of luck in your search for the perfect nanny or sitter, but just always remember that your family deserves the absolute best in terms of quality care.